On the day of my younger sister-in-law's wedding, what I heard from my extended family were incredibly shocking. "There's no seat for a poor ugly person like you. You finished your receptionist duties, so please go home now." What on earth did I do? Their terrible treatment of me made me stand there dumbfounded, but little did they know, the events that unfolded afterwards would leave them in despair instead. My name is Linda, a 28-year-old office worker. I was raised in a single-parent household where my mother is busy working and I do household chores to manage our daily lives together since childhood. I went on to attend a local national university, and after graduating, I found employment at a general company. Even after starting my job, I continued to live with my mother, supporting each other until I got married. My husband, Mark, is a tall and handsome man, graduated from a prestigious private university. We met through work, and after his persistent pursuit, we got married. His sincerity and kindness have remained unchanged even after marriage. He is a husband I am proud of, and I don't deserve someone like him. Our married life with my husband is going smoothly, but I am troubled by one thing, which is the relationship with my in-laws. Everyone in my husband's family is good-looking, which secretly makes me feel insecure. We come from completely different backgrounds when it comes to eyelids. My family has naturally single eyelid, but my husband's family has beautifully double eyelids. It seems like my mother-in-law and sister-in-law have an excessive confidence in their appearance, or perhaps they revel in a sense of superiority, as they never miss an opportunity to belittle my looks whenever we meet. This is a story from the early days of our marriage. "Your sister-in-law is really ugly, isn't she? And yeah, I wonder why Mark decided to marry a woman with such an unattractive face." It's enough. Thankfully, my father-in-law tries to intervene and stop them to some extent. But my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, who clearly have a complete disdain for me, continue with their verbal abuse. What's with the act? Even my father secretly looks down on this woman. You should say it too. Someone as ugly as you is not suitable for Mark. While being glared at by my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, my father-in-law remained silent. Unable to tolerate their verbal abuse any longer, my husband finally exploded. "Enough is enough. Stop belittling Linda all the time. You don't have the right to speak ill of the person I chose." When my husband shouted like that, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law fell silent, but with dissatisfied expressions. Perhaps sensing their lack of remorse, my husband, without hiding his frustration, said, "Let's go, Linda. I can't take it anymore." My husband said that and took my hand, leading me away from the uncomfortable in-laws' house. After that exchange, we decided to minimize our interactions with the in-laws as much as possible. We moved to an area farthest from their place, where we could still conveniently commute to work. Thanks to that, after the move, we no longer received summons from the in-laws, or had them visiting us. Even now, it seems that my husband receives frequent communication, but he seems to ignore everything except for important matters. After cutting off contact with my in-laws and leading a peaceful life, one day my husband received a message from my sister-in-law. It seemed that she is getting married and wanted us to attend the wedding. Strangely enough, it wasn't just my husband who was requested to attend. They also asked for me to be present. Despite the fact that my sister-in-law dislikes me so much, I wonder what could have prompted this change of heart. "Linda, are you okay? You don't have to attend if it's too much for you, you know?" "Yeah, it's a special celebration, I'll attend." I had a slight feeling of unease, but I felt like if I declined, something would be said. So, I decided to participate in my sister-in-law's wedding. And on the day of the wedding, when we arrived at the venue, my husband was immediately guided to the family waiting room. I tried to follow my husband, but I was stopped by my mother-in-law outside the waiting room. "Wait a moment. You will be in charge of the reception." "Huh?" I was suddenly taken aback by being separated from my husband. And my mother-in-law continued speaking. "I hope you understand, but if you try to pocket the wedding gift, I won't tolerate it." My mother-in-law, with those words, arrogantly made her point. While I was still trying to process what she said, feeling dumbfounded, she walked away from the scene. On the day itself, I became irritated by the sudden order, but my mother-in-law, whom I should have argued with, had already left. Leaving me with no opportunity to say anything, I reluctantly followed her instructions. As I finished the reception and was about to enter the venue, my mother-in-law appeared again. She stopped me from entering the venue and, without offering any words of encouragement, said something even more unbelievable than before. "Wait a moment. Please don't enter the venue." "How, what do you mean?" "I was supposed to be invited to my sister-in-law's wedding. So what does she mean by telling me not to enter the venue?" I couldn't understand my mother-in-law's words and asked for an explanation. However, her response was incredibly cruel. "I meant it literally. I invited you just to handle the reception. I won't let someone like you participate in my daughter's wedding. Now that your job is done, just go home. There's no place here for an ugly and poor person like you." Wah! With a snort and mocking laughter, my mother-in-law turned on her heels. I was left stunned by her cruel treatment and couldn't move from the spot for a while. I later learned from my husband that he was busy greeting relatives at that time. When he finished the greetings and noticed my absence, he had a bad feeling and checked the seating chart. He quickly realized that my seat was missing and hurried back to the family waiting room to confront my mother-in-law. "What's going on? Why isn't Linda's seat here? Didn't you all insist on inviting her?" My husband shouted angrily, expressing his frustration. According to him, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law responded, with faces that seemed to consider it obvious. "We're not going to let someone like her attend Emily's special wedding. We didn't prepare a seat for a poor, ugly woman from a single-parent household from the beginning. We are ashamed to let such an ugly woman meet everyone as a wife of her brother. So, we just let her serve as a receptionist and go home. You don't want to attend with such a person, do you?" Without any remorse, the women grinned and laughed. It seemed that the husband was at a loss for words. "Did Dad know about this?" My husband snapped at my father-in-law, regaining his composure. My father-in-law, in a flustered manner, replied, "Well, it would spoil the festive atmosphere, wouldn't it?" My father-in-law awkwardly made excuses. In other words, it meant that he had knowingly ignored the intentions of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. My husband was extremely furious with such family members. It seems he shouted with a red face, bursting with anger. "Both Dad and Mom, and even my sister, all of you are the worst. Fine. If you're going to have that kind of attitude, I have my own thoughts too." Saying that, the husband glared at them and left the waiting room. It is said that he then made a phone call to a certain place. "Oh, I see, I understand. Well then." After ending the call, the husband put away his smartphone. At that moment, my mother-in-law, with an exasperated expression, came to bring him back. "Mark, stop saying foolish things and come back to the venue quickly. The ceremony is about to start." My mother-in-law doesn't change her attitude that it's only natural for her not to allow me to attend. Just as my husband was about to explode with anger again at her, a staff member from the wedding venue rushed over in a flustered manner. "Oh no, it's a disaster. The majority of the groom's guests have left." What? What on earth happened?" Upon receiving the report from the wedding venue staff, the in-laws hurriedly made their way to the venue. As the staff had mentioned, despite the imminent start time of the ceremony, the guests who were supposed to attend had disappeared in large numbers. Seeing the empty and deserted venue, the bride's parents, who had also received the same report, were standing there in shock, stunned and motionless. Upon witnessing this, the husband reportedly said, "Well then, I'll leave too," and left the scene. Around the time when the husband left the venue, I, who had been expelled from the venue, couldn't bring myself to go home alone. Instead, I wandered around the vicinity of the venue, killing time until the end of the ceremony. I had sent a message to my husband, informing him that I was waiting outside after being expelled by my mother-in-law. So I hoped he would join me after the ceremony. As I waited for my husband, a group of men in suits started coming out from the venue. It was still early considering my sister-in-law's wedding had just finished. So it must have been another wedding that had ended. Oddly enough, they didn't seem to be carrying any wedding favors. While pondering about this, I absent-mindedly observed the group. To my surprise, the group started approaching me, and the man at the front called out to me, "Are you Linda? We are always grateful for your mother's kindness." Huh? By the man, who bowed and said that, and the people behind him, I was bewildered. The man in front of me seems to know me, but I didn't recognize the person. So I was at a loss for how to respond when someone I didn't remember bowed to me. My husband came out from the venue. "Ah, there you are. Linda, sorry for making you wait." "And Mark? Wait, why isn't it time for the ceremony to end yet?" "N.A. Ah, yeah, I left without participating in the ceremony." When I was bewildered and asked him, my husband said it with a smile, appearing somewhat refreshed. His demeanor only added to my confusion. "Huh? You're not participating in the ceremony, why? And, as family, is it okay for you not to participate?" "Linda, calm down. I'll explain everything." As my husband explained the story, I was surprised. First, the man who had bowed to me earlier was the groom's boss. Furthermore, the groom was an employee at the company my grandfather runs, and his boss happened to be my mother's subordinate. My maternal grandfather runs a company, and my mother also works there as an executive. While it is true that I grew up in a single-parent household, my mother, being an executive, earned a high income. Therefore, we did not have a particularly impoverished family environment. My role was to support my busy mother, who held the position of a company executive, by taking care of household tasks. The derogatory comments from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, labeling me as a poor person, stemmed from their own assumptions that being in a single-parent household meant being impoverished. It turns out that they were simply projecting their own beliefs onto me. By the way, my husband was well aware of our family situation, and he himself had interactions with my grandfather's company due to his own work. It seems that he was already acquainted with the groom prior to this because of their previous encounters. The person my husband called when he left the family waiting room was indeed this groom's boss. My husband apparently told the groom's boss about the terrible treatment I received, where despite my in-laws inviting me to the wedding. Upon hearing that, the groom's boss became indignant and said that he didn't want to celebrate a couple who would treat someone in such a manner. He then left the venue with his subordinates. While I was receiving such an explanation from my husband, he received a call from my mother-in-law on his phone. Unable to completely ignore the persistent phone calls, my husband reluctantly answered the phone with a pained expression on his face. Then, we could hear the voice of my panicked mother-in-law. Even though we didn't have the speakerphone on, her voice was loud enough for us to clearly hear. She was shouting at the top of her lungs, "Mark, it's terrible." The groom's boss suddenly said he couldn't bless the marriage between the groom and that bride, and left. My mother-in-law was in a state of panic. My husband casually remarked as if it was only natural, "Ah, I see. Well, it's a typical reaction for most people." "What are you talking about? What do you know? What did you say to them?" While she changed an attitude, my husband responded to my angry mother-in-law, surpassing calmness, and answered in a manner that could be described as cold. "Whatever. I simply stated the facts. The bride and her family are terrible people." What is that supposed to mean?" "The groom is in a panic, and my daughter is crying. The wedding has become a disaster. What are you going to do about it? Take responsibility." Ignoring my mother-in-law, who was shouting like a madwoman, my husband hung up the phone. It seemed he even turned off the power to prevent any further calls from her. With a serene expression, he took my hand and led me away. "Come on, Linda. Let's go home." And just like that, while I was still taken aback, The revenge plot against my in-laws by my husband came to an end. In the end, my sister-in-law's wedding was cancelled without even starting. The majority of the guests had left, and the bride and groom themselves were in no state to have a wedding, as they were greatly distraught. It's understandable that the wedding had to be called off. And later, the groom learned from his boss that my sister-in-law had been mistreating me, her sister-in-law, in collaboration with my mother-in-law. This mistreatment included regularly belittling and mistreating me, as well as the incident that occurred on the wedding day. He was informed about the terrible treatment I had endured. Upon hearing this, he became furious and decided to break off the engagement with my sister-in-law. After breaking off the engagement, according to my husband, who had encountered the groom at work, he said it was fortunate they had planned to register their marriage after the wedding. He mentioned that the groom had a wry smile on his face. My sister-in-law, on the other hand, had originally planned to split the wedding venue expenses. But the groom demanded that she pay the entire amount. However, with no money, she reluctantly borrowed and paid off the expenses. With the engagement being broken off, my sister-in-law ended up burdened with debt. She became a recluse in my in-laws' house. It seems that she spends her days insulting and berating my in-laws. It's because of you all that I was abandoned by him. I had to go into debt, and my life is a mess. How could you do this to me? Please calm down. Shut up, you damn old hag, according to my husband, who went to see the state of my in-laws. My mother-in-law had become worn out from being constantly insulted by my sister-in-law every day. Due to stress and had severe skin problems. Both of them had lost any trace of their once proud beauty. The wedding venue that was supposed to hold their wedding had suffered from spreading rumors and a significant decrease in customers to the point of near bankruptcy. The wedding venue was not at fault, so I feel sorry for them. According to my husband, his phone received daily messages from my in-laws, seeking help and asking for a resolution to the situation. However, my husband chose to ignore and continue disregarding their pleas for assistance. My husband chose not to respond or address their messages, and he continued to ignore them. In the midst of all this, my husband decided to change jobs and join my grandfather's company, and we moved closer to my family's home. I had been wanting to support my mother, who was still working, and my husband realized this and made it happen. I'm very happy about my husband's thoughtfulness. Additionally, when we moved, my husband changed his phone number, completely cutting off all ties with my in-laws. Recently, my husband's phone hardly rings at all, and we are able to enjoy peaceful days. I won't have to hear anything from my in-laws anymore. From now on, my husband and I can focus on enjoying a happy life together.